Hello and welcome back to the Project Hercules Diaries. I'm going to do a special video because I haven't done a special video for a while, and I thought I would do a bit of discussion about the carb, this carb here. In fact, this Dell Auto PHM41D, which is the carb I chose to go on the bike. Now, just recently I've had a few comments about it, and in previous videos I had quite a lot of comments about it when I posted a video about making the adapter or buying the carb itself, and I always try and respond to the comments in the video itself. But it takes a lot of time, and quite often not everybody reads every comment in every video. I mean, who would after all? So I tend to get the same questions or queries as a recurring theme. So I thought I'd do a special video just about the carb, and what I'll do, I'm not right, I'm not wrong. It's a bit of a balance. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. But I thought if I explained the process of how I came about coming down on this carb, it would be a little bit clearer and would perhaps answer a few of the questions. But you know, everybody's got an opinion, and I do enjoy reading the comments because sometimes you learn things. Some very clever people out there. And there we go. So without further ado, why this carb? Well, what I started off with was just a bare manifold. That's all I'd got from the original engine. And that's how it looks without the carb on. In fact, I got two manifolds. One of them was a straight out with a threaded end here, so the carb would stick out at 90 degrees to the bike. And this one, which has got a bit of a bend on, obviously one was from the front bank of cylinders and one was from the rear bank. And I thought this one would look nicer because the carb, you know, sort of blends into the lines of the bike. So the first thing I did was probably what most people would do, is I put a ruler across there and say, right, that is about 75 millimeters, something like that. So if somebody makes a carb with a 75 millimeter choke size, or you know, bore of pipe, and a side draft carb at that rather than a downdraft carb, that would be about right, because you know, common sense, yeah. The size of the bore of the carb matches the size of the inlet manifold to the engine. But as soon as the gas goes in here, this reduces in diameter, and there's a bit of a step down there as well. And if you look at the size of the exhaust diameter, that is the exhaust port. Now there are two of them, and the pipes obviously are bigger because they go over the exhaust port, but that is the actual size of the exhaust port that comes out of the engine. So that's a bit of a head scratch. It's also worth considering that it's a supercharged engine when it's in the aircraft, you know, when there's 7 pistons going up and down and 2 banks of radial. So that's what I did to start. So I went online, I went to my friend Mr. Google, and decided and had a look, at what was available on the market. And there's very little, not very many companies make a carburetor with a choke of that size. So it was a bit disappointing. I did find a manual butterfly that size that I could have used to do a basic fuel injection and indirect injection into here or something, but I didn't want to go the fuel injected route. I figured a carburetor would be easier. So what to do then? Well, I thought there must be, and it's the internet and it's the modern age, there must be some kind of calculator that says if you know a few things about your engine, what size of carburetor do you need? And there is. So I popped over to the old trusty laptop. So I'm not quite sure how well this is going to come out, or if you can even see this, but there are various cubic feet per meter calculators online where you put in the maximum RPM of the engine, you put in the size of the engine in cubic inches or in cc, and it will give you a rough value for your cubic feet per minute. But you also have to put in a couple of other parameters, the biggest one of which is the volumetric efficiency. And that is something we don't know. So we can only guess at the volumetric efficiency. There's all kinds of information online to tell you how what that actually means. But effectively, the more efficient your manifold and your intake system is, the closer to the swept volume, the actual volume of charge you can pull into the cylinder is the best way I can try and explain that based on what I've read. But for average figures a normal, what they call low tune or non-tuned engine, they being, the various sources on the internet, around 75 to 80% efficiency is about what you would expect. And a full-on race-tuned engine where the tuned length of the inlet manifold and the exhaust and all of that is optimized, you can get to close on, or in some cases even beyond 100%. So I've gone on the side of caution. There's very, very little information about sleeve valve engines, so I've just used the poppet valve closest thing, and I've made a guess it's going to be about 80% efficient from a volumetric efficiency perspective, and that gives us a number, I don't know if you can see that there, of 117 cubic feet per minute on a street car or street engine, and in a racing engine you'd want a carburetor to give you 151 cubic feet per minute. Now that's just one of the websites that I went to. There are other sites that give you the same sort of data. So if you put in the engine size, this time I've gone for cubic centimeters rather than cubic inches, but 2,796 cc is about 170 cubic inches. It's a bit more than 170. It's 170 point something, but for the purposes of what we're doing, it's it's just a comparison, isn't it? So at a maximum engine speed of 2,800 rpm and about 80% volumetric efficiency, that gives us a number down the bottom past all the adverts of 110 cubic feet per meter. Sorry, cubic feet per minute. So somewhere between 110 and 120 is about the flow rate you would like to see from a carburetor. And then I found this chart. So this chart from the Holley website. Holley is a well-known carburetor manufacturer of America, and they've got various cubic inch displacement engines on this graph. Now our 170 cubic inch displacement engine would be aligned approximately here between the 150 and the 200, and what these show is the number of cubic feet per minute required at various revs per minute. So these are RPM along the bottom, and that's cubic feet per minute, or your flow rate along the side. So if we take 2,750 RPM or 2,800 RPM, it's roughly in the middle of these two, perhaps a little to the left of centre. And if we take somewhere between 150 and 200 and we come down to about here, that's a flow rate of about 150, 175. There's 100. There's 150. We're in the ballpark, aren't we? So three separate sources have sort of given us between 120 and 150. This one is the highest. But when you look at the top of this graph, it does state that that's based on 100% volumetric efficiency. So 150 cubic feet per minute at 100%, 120, 80%. That kind of works out maths-wise. So that's brilliant. Then what do you do? Well, at this point, it's time to research what sort of flow rates you get from various carburetors. And I did that. In fact, I even pulled a little spreadsheet together, and that's quite hard to get this information because not all the vendors quote the flow rate of the carburetors. Some forums, people have tested the flow rate, but they test it with a head pressure of water and measure the flow rate based on the amount of water that flows through. And it's difficult to get empirical statistics where people have run the same test. So these are really just comparison figures from a number of sources, but they're ordered in sort of flow rate from lowest to highest. Some of these are car carburetors and some of these are motorcycle carburetors. But if we look at the motorbike carburetors, because I know most about those, Mikuni HS40, 150 cubic feet per minute. If we look at the Delorto 36mm, 200 cubic feet per minute. If we look at the 40mm Delorto, not the one I've chosen, but mine's 41 millimeters, it's 260 odd cubic feet per minute. And there aren't really any carburetors that I found that go down as low as 120 cubic feet per minute. So it just as a rough ballpark, just as a kind of a metric, I don't need, according to these numbers, a massive carb, and something like a 40mm choke carburetor should, in theory, on paper, I know it's a screen, not paper, but it should, in theory, sort of be enough. So a couple of other things I then took into consideration. The first of which is aesthetics. I mean, that's not a bad looking carburetor. I mean, it's not polished up, but with the trumpet on and the gauze on, it's not an unhandsome thing, is it? Perhaps if I had a bit of brass somewhere. And it's also a basic thing. I've had quite a few motor guzzies, just like Big Red Guzzi over there. I understand these because I've pulled numerous versions of these carburetors apart, the 36mm, the 40mm. They're a little bit heavy on the wrist. It's quite a long cable pull to get to full throttle, but they have an accelerator pump, and that means that if you snap the throttle open a couple of times, it's like holding the choke on a little bit when the engine is cold. And it sort of just generally helps. So my familiarity with this carburetor and my preference of the way it looks certainly plays a part of it. I also love the look of the Weber twin choke carburetors, which brings me to the second of the two things that I took into consideration, which is probably the most important number of all of it, that number there, the one in British pounds, excluding value added tax, which is now 20% in the UK. So a Dell'Orto 40mm, 41mm PHM carburetor runs at just under £300, whereas a very, very attractive twin choke Weber, which would look stunning on there, runs at around £640, excluding value added tax, and that's in the sale as well. Now, that's only one vendor's website. But just as a comparison, it's about twice the price. And I'm not familiar with these, so I'd be at the start of a learning curve in changing the jets and setting them up and that type of thing. So considering I'd got nothing and I needed to spend some money to buy something to try and get me going, I went for the cheaper of the two options. And that pretty much wraps up the whole process of why I went with the carb I went with. And I must admit, when it arrived, I thought, yeah, the common sense test, does that look right? How do I make this push-on carburetor fit onto this flange, which has got a thread on it? Well, I've already done a video about that, but I just ended up making an adapter, which is this piece here, made from a solid piece of aluminium, and that just screws onto the end of there. I was quite pleased about that. It was the first time I'd screw cut the thread. So that screws onto there quite nicely eventually. See if we can do it without dropping it. And then the carburetor pushes onto there and it all locks up nicely. So I had to make a few parts to get that going, but it does actually run. The engine does run, and that's kind of, I wouldn't say I'm fully vindicated, but certainly I was very pleased that we managed to get the engine to run, and of course that just pushes onto there and then tightens up, and there we go. So what more can I tell you? Well, like I said, it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just what I've gone with. If it looks too small or you think it's too small, that's fine. It might actually still be too small. When I've run it for the first 10,000 miles, I might feed back on what I think in terms of the carburetor, and it might be that I make a different manifold at some point and have two of them side by side, or one slightly lower than the other. It's the custom bike world after all, and it's all about being different. So that's where I'm at. Thank you for the comments, really do appreciate it, and I do try and respond to them, but I've had that much, I won't call it noise, I've had that much interest, shall we say, about the carburetor. I thought it was worth posting those bits, and I'm just going to leave you with this video because who can resist? So there we go. It does work, and it seems to work okay. So I think that's enough ramblings on the carb for one night. As usual, thank you for watching. More updates will follow.